And welcome to the Adlai Stevenson Center on Democracy, and a special welcome to faculty and students from the North Lawndale College Prep who's come here with us today, and welcome to everyone here. My name is Nancy Froman. I'm a volunteer with the Stevenson Center on Democracy. At the center we try to bring programs that focus on topics that are timely and interesting and topical, that are things that relate to our community and our world. Our next event is going to be on November 13th. It'll be a very interesting topic, I think, on water security. It'll be water quality and quantity, which is a hot topic for these days. And we're also trying to pull in some feedback from you all. So if you're on our mailing list, you might have gotten an email from us with a short survey. It's very short, I promise. It's only 5 questions, and asks what you might be interested in, so that as we do some of our planning, we can make sure to include some things that are meaningful to you all and get your input. But here we are today. I welcome you to this event. I moved here recently from overseas, and I will tell you, around the world and in the U.S., the issue of whether our criminal justice systems are effective, and particularly our juvenile justice systems, whether they're effective, is a hot topic. In the juvenile courts, how do you not only reduce recurring crime, but also how do you encourage and help and facilitate meaningful and contributing members of our society? And with it, what I have seen is that balance between punitive and rehabilitative is crucial, and one that people are trying to get a handle on. And today we're going to hear about a new approach to this topic right here in our own Chicago area. The Cook County was one of 10 sites that was awarded grants by the Department of Justice to develop this program. And today we have Judge Colleen Sheehan to tell us about this new approach, which is restorative justice. It's the community courts. And Judge Sheehan has been a member of the Cook County Circuit Court since the year 2000, and is part of the works now within the juvenile court system, and will preside over the new court. And we are lucky to have her here to tell us how this approach, what it is, how it works, and what it's going to mean to our community and to our youths. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, and the other Nancy, the two Nancys. And thank you all for coming out here this afternoon. And thank you for the center for inviting me. I'm very humbled and honored to be here. I was lecturing, or I sat on a panel yesterday at the University of Chicago, and whenever I do something like this, I just can't help but go way back to, my parents are immigrants. They're from Ireland. Both of them have 8th grade educations, and very smart people, but they didn't have the opportunity to be well educated. And I'm always sort of blown away that somebody from the University of Chicago or this great center asked me to come up here and do this, because I still sort of feel like the little kid delivering papers from immigrant parents. So, but I'm delighted to be here. When Nancy asked me to speak, she had hoped that it would be not just a lecture of me coming up here and lecturing, but rather we could have some interaction. So I thought the best way to probably do that was just to explain a little bit about what I do, and give you some insight about what's been developing in Cook County. And at any time, if you want to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and we can take this off in any direction in which I have some expertise in, so I'm happy to do that. I have been a judge in Cook County for the past 16 years. Most of my time has been spent in the juvenile justice division. I was in the adult criminal division for about 6 years, and then the rest of that time I have been in juvenile court. I really did not want to go to juvenile court. I kind of went kicking and screaming. I just didn't think that would be a really good fit for me, but I can say that it really has been something that has changed my life professionally, and maybe even more deeply personally. The thing that I noticed about juvenile court, or was really just sort of struck by about juvenile court, is the first year that I was sitting in juvenile court, there were 5 children who were on my probation that were murdered. That is, I give that statistic a lot, and sometimes I almost feel like I'm saying that's too much, but I think that that is an important statistic. The second year, there were 12 kids that were murdered. I have stopped counting. It is well into the, to the 30s, and that's just in my particular courtroom. This is not an uncommon thing for judges throughout the Juvenile Justice Division in Cook County. So when something like that occurs, and I had been a public defender, I had been a private criminal defense attorney, so it wasn't like I was, not used to seeing some pretty gritty things, but I had never seen anything like that. And, part of it is, when that starts to happen, you think, you sort of look over your shoulder and you think, who's in charge of this? Who's in charge to make this stop? And, I didn't really see a whole lot of people who were in charge to making that stop. And I will tell you that as I stand here today, and I'll be talking about the Restorative Justice Community Court, I never started out to try to create a Restorative Justice Community Court. It's something that has happened very organically, and this is what I'm going to share with you today, sort of the organic journey that took place. I knew nothing about restorative justice at all when I became a judge, and this is the journey of basically how it happened. A probation officer asked me if I would go speak to some students at Fenger High School. And Fenger High School, I don't know if many of you are familiar with Fenger High School. I see some students from North Lawndale, from the city, who might be a little bit more familiar. It's on the south side of the city of Chicago. There was a really horrific murder that happened from one of the students, that he was essentially beaten to death, not in school, but in a community center close to the school. I went there before this happened, and I had, and I think back upon this now, and it amazes me. I had never been in a Chicago public high school. I was a judge, and I was sitting in juvenile court, and I had never been inside a Chicago public high school. And I went there, and before I went there, there were other probation officers and other friends that I had, some in law enforcement, and they said to me, you're wasting your time going to Fenger High School. You shouldn't go there. Those kids, they're gonna act like animals. They'll never. You're not going to be able to get a word in edgewise. You're wasting your time. And I had heard about the troubles in Chicago public high schools, and I drove down there, and I walked into the school, and I kind of half almost imagined that the principal of the school was going to come greet me and say, with armed, and say, okay, Judge, you run to the, I got you covered, and I'd be running and trying to duck bullets and things like that. And I got there, and the school was beautiful. It was gorgeous. It was an old school with beautiful wood, woodwork all over the school. And I walked into the classroom. I was waiting for the students to arrive, and I asked 2 questions. I said, how many of these kids are gang involved? And all of the faculty, they just sort of looked at each other, and they just looked at me, and they said, involved? And I thought, yeah, involved. I didn't understand sort of how they didn't know how to answer that question, because to my mind, you're either in a gang or you're not in a gang. And that if you just chose not to be in a gang, you could say, oh, no, thank you, I don't want to be in your gang, and you'd go off on another direction. And looking back, I just cannot believe how naive I was in thinking that. And I also asked the answer to that question, by the way, is they said 80%. And I just was dumbfounded, 80%. And then I was really scared, because I thought, oh, these people told me not to come here. These kids are all in gangs. And I asked the teacher, what class is this? And she said, this 4th period. I said, what class of 4th period? She goes, it's the entire 4th period. And I was like, how many people is that? And she said, about 100. And I thought, oh my, I can't believe I'm going to come in here and speak to 100 kids who are in gangs. And I was fairly terrified. So I got in, and everyone came in, and I looked out, and I said to the students, this was my introduction from the teacher. She just said, all right, here's Judge Sheehan. She's here to teach you about civics. And so I got up and I thought, I don't know what she's talking about. I'm not here to teach about civics. But I said, much like I'm saying to you here today, I said, I am not here to teach you. I'm here to listen. I'm here to share and tell you what I know and listen from you. And I relayed to them how the people that I had spoken to said that these kids were going to act like animals. And I said, I am going to treat you like the young men and women that you are, and that I'm going to give you the respect that you deserve. And you could have heard a pin drop, and you could see all the kids sort of sitting up straighter in their chairs. And as I began to kind of give them my lecture for the day and speak of what I thought they would be interested in, all they really wanted to speak to me about was the police-community relationship. Now, this is before iPhones. This is before people were taking videos and pictures, and they kept asking me these questions, and I thought, why are these kids so concerned about the police? I just did not understand it. Another thing I was obviously very naive about. And one young man in particular, he kept asking me, that's okay. This happens in court all the time. Don't worry about it. I'm not one of those judges that takes people and wants to hold them in contempt. I understand, so it's okay. So he kept asking me, he kept saying to me, looking at me and wanting to know, how do the police get away with what they get away with? And he was speaking about a particular case in California, and I did not know. I said, well, I can't really comment on that. I'm not familiar with that case. And he just kept grilling me, wanting to know, how do the police get away with what they get away with? And he just kept saying, well, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And he assumed that I was in the sort of the back pocket of the Chicago police, and which I thought was ironic because I had just decided a case not that long ago that I decided against the police, and the police were very upset with me. So I thought it was very interesting that the police were really upset with me on a particular case, and yet the public perception, or these kids' perception, was that I was in the pocket of the police. And he just kept demanding, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And I was standing up there, and I thought, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about this? And my mind was reeling. I didn't know what to do about it. And finally, I just stopped, and I looked at him, and I said, what are you going to do about it? Whoa. That's exactly what they did. 100 kids were like, ooh, she told you. And so I had no knowledge of restorative justice, but I rather intuited that if there was a round table, and I said, if there was some place that you could speak with the Chicago Police Department, invested in solution, not invested in being a victim, but invested in solution, and not on the street during a crisis moment, but really invested in the solution of this, of your relationship, of repairing your relationship, would you do this? And so afterwards, there was about at least 10% of the kids came up to me, and they asked me if I was going to do this. And I said, well, I guess I have to now. And I really didn't know what that would look like or how I would do this. And I just started asking questions, and there were some people who helped. And we had a day. We had a day with some officers and some youth. We didn't do it at Fenger High School. It's another thing I was pretty naive about. I tried to speak with the principal at Fenger High School. I tried to bring this program to Fenger High School, and people weren't calling me back. And I thought, who doesn't call a judge back that asks to have a program in their school? But she or it was he, I think, at the time, didn't do that. So I went to Hirsch High School, where I had some access to Hirsch High School. And it was a very powerful day. There were police officers there and students there. I can tell you, there was people, officers were apologizing, students were apologizing, there was tears. It was extremely powerful. And then, the day ended. And that was that. And it was something I knew should continue, but I really didn't know how to continue it much beyond what I was doing and kind of looking at what was in front of me. There was no real policy behind that, or there was, we weren't sort of baking it into the institution of the juvenile justice system. And a few years later, there was a young man who was in front of me, and he was arrested for aggravated battery, and he was just very upset with the police, how the police treated him, and I heard myself saying to him, you know, if there was a program where you could sit and, you know, and be in solution and not be a victim, you know, would you do this? I'd give you some community service hours to participate in this. Would you do it? And he looked up at me and he just said, he's like, I would do it for free. So I thought, okay. So I contacted the superintendent of the police, and I didn't get him, but I got third in command, which I thought was pretty high. And he was very interested in this, and he sent police officers, he sent commanders, lieutenants. They were African American, they were Caucasian, they were Hispanic, there were women, they were men. It was across the board, and we had kids who came to this. I called it the summit. There was about 100. So, and it was equal kids and police. And again, the same thing happened. It was one of my favorite things of all time. It happened because my sister helped me do this, and she was very much into something called street yoga. And I was trying to put this all together, and she said, we really should put this a little section of street yoga into this. And I said, you know, I am down to the minute here. Where am I going to fit street yoga into this? So the man who was that she was working with in street yoga, she said, just let him write him in an email, and he'll write you back as to how we could fit this in. And his email was so calming to me that I thought, oh, this is so calming. Let's do this, because he suggested that maybe we do some exercises after lunch and before we go into what you'll come to know as a peace circle later on. So Osama bin Laden had just been killed, and there was an order from the Chicago Police Department that all police officers had to wear full uniform, sidearms, their bulletproof vests. That's not a real way to make people feel at ease and sort of on equal footing with each other. So in come like 40 police officers with their vests and their guns, and at one point, you know, these police officers were, you know, in the warrior pose, the yoga warrior pose, and you know, doing namaste. And one police officer came up to me afterwards and just said, you know, I wish that we could do this right before roll call. You know, during roll call, right before we go out onto the street. And that's when I saw that it was not just, you know, the community or the youth that really wanted this, but the police were thirsty for something different as well. And so again, that was a wonderful day. It got a lot of attention. There is a videotape that's online. It's and I'll give you that information later. That videotape actually made it all the way out to Oakland. There was the city council in Oakland somehow got a hold of it, and there was they viewed it, and so I was starting to get phone calls from people across the country regarding this. So I knew I was kind of onto something. But again, so again, but it wasn't anything that was really sort of, you know, if I left, it wasn't going to happen. I mean, somebody else would have to take up the mantle. So, and I'm going to speak to you a little bit about something that is going on with Chicago. So I'll speak today about two initiatives, really. One is the Bridging the Divide initiative, and one is the Restorative Justice Community Court. This one involves the police relationship with the community, and the others involving the use of restorative justice in court. But I was speaking with the executive director of the violence prevention at the YMCA, and I said, you know, I would really just, you know, sometimes when you're sitting in juvenile court and you see just the horrors, really, I sometimes just have to ask myself, is anything going right? Is there anything that's right with the world? And I've come to know that, you know, when either a probation officer or a parent just starts to give me a litany of everything horrible that this young person is doing, and I know they're completely off track, I always make them say, I've said, well, we're going to get to that, but can you tell me one thing that he's done right? And just so that we can have some perspective, because I think that so much of what happens when dealing with certain communities is that we just have the focus and the camera pointed on what's wrong, not what's going right. So I said to this director, I said, you know, I would just love to to do something. I wanted to do a photography contest between police and youth from the same area. And what they would have to do is they'd have to take a picture of something that was either beautiful, inspiring, or showed strength. And the police would take the pictures on their tour of duty. And so I kind of thought if police were driving around instead of looking for something, you know, horrible happening, and that's their job in part, but if they had a camera, they could take a picture of something that showed strength, beauty, or they were inspired by. And the kids from the same area could do the same, and it would be a photography contest. Because one of the things that I had learned from those past two experiences were that you can't just start talking about the issue. It's really hard to just start talking about the issue before I know who you are, before I have some sense of who you are. And the YMCA, along with the Chicago Police Department, thought it was a great idea. And we did create that photography contest, and we did more than that. There was a 8-week curriculum that went along with this called Bridging the Divide, and it brings the youth and the police together. And over the course of 8 weeks, they come to know each other. And I just thought you might like to see one of the winning photos is that. And again, that was just something that I began to see, that now we had institutions. We had institutions that were working on something. It wasn't just me working on something, because I saw that while I felt good doing it and it was a really nice day, that really wasn't going to move things along the way they needed to be moved along. And what had happened was, as I said, the iPhone kind of came. People were taking a lot of pictures, people were taking a lot of videos, and people were getting angry. And in Chicago, there was a group of ministers from the South and West Side that became very vocal, and they became very vocal with a lot of political leaders. And one of the people that they had contacted was the chief judge of Cook County. And they had asked, we would like to take some of these youth who are in the system, and we would like to try to see if we could work with these youth. And youth, the way they define it, was the age of 18 to 26. Now, I do work in juvenile court, but there's a lot of research, particularly the brain science research, that shows that the brain isn't fully developed, and that those ages between 18 and kind of 24, 26 years old, 26 years old is when the final functioning of the brain finishes, and that the last part that gets developed is sort of decision-making, judgment. So those of, not the students back there, but those of us who remember what it was like to be, 20, 22, 25, I thought about that. I was like, I was 26 and I was a lawyer representing people, and my judgment part wasn't fully functioning, but that they somehow, maybe should be treated a little differently. And so the community was demanding it. The chief judge heard their demands. He called me on the phone, knowing the work that I had done with restorative justice, and said, do you think we could translate some of this stuff that we're doing with the youth in juvenile court to the adults? And I said, yes, and I had no idea how. I just said yes. And
education can cost less than to house a prisoner in jail for a year. So if we take an inmate, so to speak, and we can educate them for 4 years, well, obviously they have to participate or want to participate, but if they participate, they can come out educated, fantastic human beings, and sometimes they're put in that position not by, anyone other than their parents. Their parents could be on drugs, or it's not necessarily this person's fault that they are committing these crimes. Sometimes they're committing these crimes just to survive. So I think if everyone opens their eyes in a different fashion, I'm not saying that we need to coddle these, criminals, because they are criminals, but we have to see the costs that is, coming onto the community. We can be spending the money to build community centers for children to hang out after school, play basketball, play video games, read books, commingle and play together. whether they're, 6 years old or 17 years old after high school. But we are spending all this extra money on police overtime, on all this, criminal justice, where we could, like you mentioned, be putting this money into the community in different ways.
This is just a comment. Many years ago, I heard this. I wondered why somebody didn't do something, and then I realized I am somebody.
Yeah.
You are that story. That's your story.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. Somebody, we all are somebody, and that's, again, what I love about this. It's taking somebody who's, the president of the county board versus the resident in the community all have something to contribute.
Hi, I have a couple different questions. Looking at this model, so if you have a prosecutor who's not interested in going along with that idea, does there have to be a full decision that everybody agrees that this will be a community restorative justice case, or can you make that decision that this is going to be?
That's a good question. We have memorandums of understanding that have been created. This would really not be possible in a meaningful way unless we had the buy-in from all of the system stakeholders, the public defender's office for that matter, because a lot of people are like, I don't want my client sitting in here and talking about something, because I don't necessarily agree that he or she is going to be treated fairly and it'll be used against them, the prosecutor. So we do have memorandums of understanding that have been created, and we're working on them right now to say we've all agreed that this is the approach. And we agree that we are going to take a certain type of case with a certain criteria. You have to be 18 to 26. You can have no more than one felony conviction in your background. You can be charged with a nonviolent misdemeanor or felony. So it would be things like burglary. It could be things like stolen vehicle, criminal damage to property, things of that nature. And you have to live in the community of North Lawndale, and the crime had to have been committed in the community of North Lawndale. What's old is new again, because my boss, Judge Michael Tooman, who's the presiding judge of juvenile court, said to me when I was working on this, he said, my first assignment back in the 60s, because he was a public defender, was working in boys court. And and at that time, you could be charged as an adult at 17. So between the ages of 17 and 21, if you got charged with a crime, you'd go through boys court. Because they knew even back then, even without a lot of the science that we have, that perhaps somebody from the ages of 17 to 21 maybe shouldn't be saddled with a felony conviction for their whole life. So they'd take a felony and they'd drop it down to a misdemeanor. I think it's very fascinating, and I'd love to have an intern work on this, why it was that they stopped doing that. It really did coincide with the civil rights movement is when they stopped doing that. So I don't know, I'm not making any great correlations between that, but I find that's interesting. Yes, ma'am.
And that observation would probably be validated by Ava DuVernay's recent documentary, 13th, which addresses this, the juvenile justice system and why we have such mass incarceration. I think that the issue for me as I sit here and listen, yes, it is a lot cheaper to go this route and to perhaps provide education or job resources as opposed to a criminal justice solution, but I also think it starts at something very basic. When you look at children or young people, are we labeling them criminals? Are we labeling them as young men who have made some bad choices? One of the most powerful things and experiences I had was with Cliff Ellis, who was at North Lawndale at the Justice Center.
He is on the executive coordination team, so he and I are working together.
Wonderful.
And our community court coordinator, Brittany Smalls, went to North Lawndale College Prep. We just hired her. She starts tomorrow, so she lives in the North Lawndale community.
I'm a clinical psychologist, and he spoke to a group of the Illinois Psychological Association, and he went through a list of activities. Now imagine, I'm probably like one of the few African-American psychologists in this organization. But he went through a whole list of activities and asked these psychologists to be honest and say, how many of these have you committed? Mm-hmm. So we're all criminals. We may not want to admit it. We've done something criminal. But when it happens within certain communities, and we have to talk about class too, in terms of, it's not just race, but also class, that there's a different level of treatment that occurs for them. So that the idea of redemption, the idea of, what's really going on, and taking a look at that, and not allowing one incident to define that whole person's existence and who they are.
You're absolutely correct. And in fact, North Lawndale is second only to Inglewood in terms of violent crimes that are committed in North Lawndale. We picked North Lawndale as a partner because North Lawndale has a really pretty strong infrastructure. Cliff Nellis is the executive director of the Lawndale Christian Legal Center, and he is a founder of the North Lawndale Restorative Justice Hub, which has 26. I can show you this. It has 26 service providers. So they do things like, there's people there with mental health, literacy, school support. So they have a group of 26 community service providers that have already been working in North Lawndale. So they had a really great infrastructure, because if you're going to try to do a transformation with the criminal justice system, and you're going to go out to the community, it's sort of like, where are we finding this community? Are we like walking down the streets and plucking them up? There has to be you have to have an organization. But we also have to go beyond just the Restorative Justice Hub. We have to go out there and do community outreach to the police, to merchants, to residents on the street. Because someone who is a resident on the street might say, I'd like to do something, but I don't have the time to join this 26, community service collaboration. But I have something to offer. Likewise, on the system side, we have to educate the system side people as well that there is an alternative that can be used. 7 out of 10 young men who are in North Lawndale have felony convictions. 7 out of 10. And when you think about it, like if you hear this and you think, well, he's a convicted felon. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Even I do it, and I work with this. You think, ooh, a convicted felon. Most convicted felons are not committing triple homicides or horrible sexual assault cases. Most convicted felons, even the ones that receive prison time, are not staying in prison forever. And that's a whole other issue about how we incarcerate people, but that's another talk. But where are they going? They're coming back to the community. So they're coming back to the community stigmatized. They're coming back to the community with a felony conviction, which it just alleviates so much opportunity for them. If they go through this program, part of that, the agreement, and that you asked the question, does the state's attorney agree? Does the public defender agree? If they go through this program, their case will either be dismissed by the state, or if there is a conviction, it will be vacated. Not even expungible, but vacated. And then we continue to have to work with legislature. One of the things that when you think about our government, and you think about the branches of government, you have the executive, you have the legislative, and you have the judiciary. And I guess, I don't know, maybe it was just sort of my Catholic Irish upbringing, where if a teacher said something, I did it, and my government was my government. You just think of those 3 pillars as just 3 pillars that are like, just firm. But I have never known them to be they're very liquid. The executive's trying to come over and steal something from the judiciary. The judiciary is like, oh no, trying to take it, and it's much more fluid than I ever, thought. So, it's not enough that I think that we just look and say, well, that's your job, legislature. I think that there is a role. We have to be cognizant of what our powers are and where our limits are, for sure. I mean, as a judge, throughout the course of this, I have felt like I have gone way out on a limb, and sometimes, like, I'll be driving home from an event like this, and I'll be like, oh, I can't believe, and that camera's on. I'm like, oh, I'm sick to my stomach. What did I say? Somebody's going to use that against me. But I don't really have an agenda. I can't believe I got this far in life. So.
Is there any organization set up to help the parents of the troubled children?
Not enough. Because when you're talking about it's, and that's another thing that never ceases to amaze me. It's like, you're really cute, you're young, we want to help you. Okay, you're a teenager, you've done something wrong, we still want to help you. You're 17, you turn 18, you're a criminal. You know, it's like you were reachable a month ago, but now you're not reachable. So not enough. But yes, there are organizations. You know, unfortunately, one of the best ones is in Back of the Yards, which is one of the restorative justice hubs. They have a program for mothers who have either lost children to gun violence or have lost children because their children have committed violence. So they often sit in circle together, where you have a mother of a murdered son and a mother whose son has committed murder. We took a group of these women from that program to the education. Judges have to go to educational. There's a conference for judicial education every 2 years, and the Supreme Court has to approve every single person who goes to this conference. And usually it's judges teaching judges, because they don't, it's for a whole host of reasons. Outsiders are not always the best idea, because then that would not allow for free flow of exchange of ideas, because someone could say, hey, you think that way, you're biased, and it would be an issue. But we brought these women and sat in circle with a number of judges, and it was really powerful to see that, to expose not just, like it happens, when it happens in a year, it happens in February and it happens in April. The first time we brought these women, I just thought it was just going to be so powerful. And the women from the community barely got to speak. The judges were just talking about their cases and really just unburdening themselves. And I said to the woman when I was done, I said, I'm sorry. I didn't think that they would talk this much. And this woman whose son had been killed looks at me and she touches me and she said, those judges needed to talk. And she meant it in the most generous way. They did, but I tell that story for a point, because I don't think that they thought that judges thought that deeply about these cases and how it went home with them and how they thought about it and how they thought about something they did and how haunting it was at times. I don't think that the community thought judges thought about that at all. In April, it was the opposite. The judges just couldn't get enough of what was going on with the people.
In the practical sense, how do you have to really get people in the right frame of mind, which I think is what you were saying, is they get to know you, is that the youth or whoever commits the crime has to realize this is not a get-off-free card, there's a responsibility to it. And on the flip side, you have the people who were wronged, or the community have to get off of the I want revenge and really I want to make something work. So on the practical side, which is more difficult, and how do you get the two sides to kind of come to that space to make it work?
It's difficult, but sometimes it's not as difficult as you think. My experience at least in juvenile court, and I am not dealing with kids who are just not going to school. It's not just truant cases or I stole the candy bar. I mean, I deal with murders, I deal with aggravated robberies, sexual assault cases, so residential burglary, some serious cases. And I have found there was only one case, and I have tried, I've been there 9 years, there has to have been almost nearing 10,000 cases that I've seen in the course of the time that I've been in juvenile court, and there's been one case where somebody was out for that blood. Far and away, it was people, I am just amazed at their generosity, and the one thing that they want is, I don't want you not to do this again even. I don't want you to ruin your life to these young people, which I think is just extremely generous. And I think that, it's difficult, but so is it difficult to put people in cages, essentially. It's expensive. It can be inhumane. In restorative justice, I always say this about restorative justice, it can be very effective, it's not always efficient. But then I've decided I'm changing that a little bit too. It can be we put a lot of people through our criminal justice system, and we do that very efficiently. But it's not, when you look at efficiency in terms of, Is it efficient that we're spending our money the way we spend our money? Is it efficient in terms of a cost, in terms of humanity, and in terms of whether or not it's effective? So much of our policy has been based upon, not real great social and medical science, but we're getting better at that, I think. So, yes, sir.
Why did you start it so late with 18-year-olds and not with 13, 14?
That's a good question. We do restorative justice in juvenile court. That's where I think most of the work of restorative justice has come from people who have worked with juveniles. It is my hope that we will be doing, I'm constantly working with people in juvenile court, not just to abandon this idea. They do a lot of restorative practices in juvenile court. Selfishly, as a judge, I don't get to necessarily participate in that, which is a good thing because it's best if they don't come see me in the first place. So I'm continually working with that. But the real honest answer about that is just that's where the movement was at the time. It was just sort of the thing that people were talking about, the 18 to 26-year-olds. And I think that people who were in communities that had a bunch of 18 to 26-year-olds saw that they were probably getting much more services in juvenile court when they went to 26th Street, not very many, and there was not a lot of services out for these kids. And so you think about it. Think about any of you have children, think about your child who is been raised by caring parents, who's been raised in a safe community, who have had the opportunity to go to a four-year college perhaps, get a degree. What does this child do? They come home and live with you. They are not standing on their own. And so when you have, so these kids at that age, no matter who you're looking at, these kids are there. A lot of people I've heard them say, "Oh, you've lost them by then." Really, if you can't get them by second grade, forget it. That to me is slightly cynical. Maybe the evidence bears that out, but in some ways, that age group is a much more effective group to use this restorative justice practice because younger than that, I might not be so, not willing, but they might not have the capacity to understand. However, I know people who do this with kindergartners. Yes, ma'am.
It certainly seems to me that a 14 or 15-year-old kid, if you intervene in his life, you're going to have a much bigger effect than somebody. I mean, you can talk about full brain development between 18 and 26, but I think a lot of it's developed by the time they're 15, 16, 17. And
yet, we have 18 to 26-year-olds make a disproportionate number of people who are entering our criminal justice system. So, at least the adult criminal justice system. So, yes, if we could have reached these kids, and hopefully this community court, one of the dreams that we all have is that it will be a court that, yes, there's programming and services available for people who are going through this court, but also for the community. So if the community said, I have someone who didn't necessarily steal a car, but maybe needs some help with mental health services or other or job training, that this is looked as a beacon of light and of hope for the community and not as what courts usually symbolize. Yes, ma'am.
I'm unclear, how well established is this? Are cases actually being referred?
The cases, right now we're in the planning and implementation stage of it. We've created a lot. We hope to have the first cases going through there in spring of 2017. The grant that we got mandates that, and I'm hopeful that we will be meeting that goal. We're going to start out small rather than big and ineffective. We'd rather start out small and be effective. And the building site that has not been officially stated is one, is actually housed it's in the same building as the North Lawndale College Prep, the Catalyst School that was closed down. So, but you have the mayor saying we can have any building that's abandoned or unused in the city of Chicago for $1. And that's nice, but it takes a lot more than just having the building. There's a lot of mountains to climb. One of the things that you know, first it was me, and then it was one woman that I worked with, and then there was a team of 3, and then there was about 6 of us, and we called ourselves the core team for a while. And I just was amazed at how many mountains that needed to be, or hurdles that needed to be overcome, that nobody ever talked about that, ever. They just kept doing what was in front of them. Now we've added community and, you know, and system stakeholders. We just had a wonderful meeting the other day, this past week, and it sort of, to me, felt like, oh, this is falling apart a little bit. It's falling apart, but I felt that way from the beginning. I'd do something and I'd be like, this is never going to work. I've taken this as far as I can take this, and I'm like, oh, that was pretty good. You know, I'm all right with that. And then something else would happen, and we had a great meeting where we were sort of losing sight of. We were trying to figure out how we were going to fit this into the regular way we do business. And then somehow in the course of that meeting, it was like, no, we have got to inspire the leaders and inform the leaders and convince the leaders to lead in this way. So, yeah, yes, go ahead. Anyone?
There's a disproportionate amount of criminals in jail that have psychological issues. They are sort of kind of being held in jails instead of psychiatric hospitals or, you know, psychiatric stays. Is there a part of your court that is going to be where people will be able to get some type of psychiatric, not just an evaluation, but
services?
Health
yes.
Services?
Yes. I mean, the Sheriff Dart does a good job of, and he is a partner on board with this court. Currently, Cook County is the largest mental health care provider. I should say the Cook County Jail is the largest mental health provider in the country. And yes, that's, you know, yes, that's part of it. That is part of it, and that's a big part of it. I was leaving court the other day, and I saw this young man sitting on the steps, and he was just like, and I just looking around, and I thought, what is he doing? What is he doing? And then all of a sudden I went, oh, he's looking to see if somebody's after him. You know, I mean, it's the way in which some kids, and it's not to say that there's plenty of kids, like, you know, I'll say this to parents that and young people that come in front of me. I'm like, they'll be at, say, Hirsch High School or Fenger High School. I'll say, there is a valedictorian at Fenger High School. There is a valedictorian at Hirsch High School. There are lots of kids who are making it, but that's not good policy. Just because you can take a look at some kids who are making it, we have to take a look at what are most kids making it, and if not, then we have some flawed policy going on. And to sit and live in that fear is not real conducive to, I'm sure the psychologists could tell us that, it's not conducive to a whole bunch of stuff. I saw a hand over there.
I would like to say that this has been so illuminating and so helpful to all of us. And we hope that all the work that you're doing, we see it happening to be useful not only for North Lawndale, but for developing new processes in the system. So thank you so much, Judge.
You're welcome. You're welcome.